Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. Today I'm talking to Jen Stevens with Christian Fire Poppy. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with her. If you're not, the link for her channel is in the description box below, so make sure to subscribe. She's also in my featured channels list on my homepage. Well, General Conference is just around the corner. I've been doing a lot of videos exploring the different possibilities and things that could happen, and just this interesting period of time between the passing of President Nelson and the ordaining of President Oaks, and what's happened since he's been ordained president of the church. And there's already been a lot. And for me, I can't believe that this is only going to be his first general conference as president of the church because so much has happened. And so Jen has some slides prepared that she wants to share. And we're just going to talk about this upcoming general conference and what's been going on lately. Before we get into that, I don't know if you guys remember if you've been watching my channel for a while, but I think it was in 2022. That's when I started the Flood the Earth challenge, where we were sharing copies of the Book of Mormon. We wanted to share 10,000 copies, and we met that goal. I tried recently to do it again, but it just wasn't really going too far. I think that mission has been accomplished, so I've decided to discontinue the second challenge. But the first time, very early on, that's actually, I think, when I first met Jen. And then
Yeah,
shortly after,
yeah.
Jen forwarded me like a poem from her sister-in-law, Lisa Washburn. And Lisa, since that time, has written a book and it is now on Amazon. And so we're going to be doing an interview with her in the next couple of weeks. But I'm going to put the link for her book in the description box. It's called Emily's Tree. Um, can you tell us a little bit about the book, Jen?
Yeah, so I had a chance to read it. It was a really fun and beautiful book. It's geared towards young adults, but as an adult woman with kids myself, I actually really enjoyed it. I loved how it was very relatable as a member of the church and a woman, just kind of the journey. And I love how she describes the spiritual journey and the little clues along her life. I think we all have these really special spiritual life paths. Sometimes we're more aware of, the little signals that God is sending us. And it is basically, yeah, the story of a woman who ends up meeting the missionaries and joining the church, but it's very exciting and it just kind of highlights what that process might look like in a fun, romantic drama sort of way. So,
Perfect. I'm going to read the little summary that she sent me in an email. Emily Hughes' senior year is full of firsts, applying for college, falling for a boy, and unexpectedly encountering faith. Haunted by a recurring dream of a radiant, mysterious place, she begins searching for its meaning just after her life starts to unravel. After hitting rock bottom, Emily crosses paths with missionaries and is drawn into a new world where she meets Andrew, a boy who challenges everything she thought she knew about herself. As their relationship deepens, Emily finds herself falling for Andrew and the beliefs he holds dear. But when painful truths come to light, she must decide what and who she can truly trust. So, again, I'll put a link for this book in the description box below. This is Lisa Washburn, the sister in law of Jen Stevens. And then we'll be doing an interview about the book in a couple weeks. Okay, so Jen, what are
all
your
right.
thoughts about this upcoming general conference, and what's the first thing you have to share?
Well, first I have to say I love how we didn't coordinate. I had no idea how he was going to open that. He did mention he was going to talk about Lisa's book, but kind of a throwback to the Book of Mormon challenge. And honestly, the Book of Mormon challenge was what really opened my eyes when you did that on your channel to the power of social media, how we can work together as a team. You can get like-minded people together on a channel. And for you, it's people that are interested in the second coming. We're excited about Jesus Christ. We're really into it. And so it's a place to come because sometimes, in your day-to-day life, people are like, yeah, I don't want to talk about that. But it's a place where we can all come together and feel that excitement, share that excitement, that anticipation. And so I kind of wanted to kind of go back to like our roots, like when we first We first connected and we started sharing things. You mentioned, Lisa was a part of that, and the Book of Mormon Challenge was a part of that. And you were throwing out to women to speak up. And the first thing that I talked about was excitement for General Conference and Holy Day stacking. And I actually just this morning discovered some really cool insights about that going back to 2020 and how that kind of reveals where we might be at today and the relevance for today and the convergence that we see with this General Conference being Easter, General Conference, Passover week. We have a comet in the sky that is getting really close to the sun at that point, a very rare sun geyser that could become as bright as Venus, maybe not. It might fly into the sun and disappear, but that also could kind of affect, the activity of the sun and things like that.
Mm.
Um, but a lot of exciting things, fireballs that are coming down, just a lot of things that are happening leading up to this Easter, even just kind of the growing, concerns and things happening with the Iran war. There's just a lot going on in the world. And so getting to hear the words of a modern day prophet, like, couldn't be more timely.
Yeah, there's so much going on. And by the way, if you've been watching my channel, you know that I've brought up the meteors a couple times. One time I made a video about it and then it came up in a live stream. And since those two videos, apparently there have been even more fireballs. And yes, I guess it happens around this time of year, but what doesn't normally happen is just this high of frequency of people noticing the fireballs. And to me, that's what's important. Um, the Lord may have coordinated it in such a way that, this known phenomenon this year, a lot of people are seeing it. It's getting people's attention. It's coming at a very interesting time for us as members of the church because it's right before General Conference. And I don't think I brought this up in the first video I did about these meteors, but I meant to share my spreadsheet for meteors. And there was one, what I think was a really important one back in 2023. It was a rare daytime meteor over northern Israel. And this was just like 6 months before October 7th started. So I don't know that it's connected, but that's one that made news. Some people thought it was a sign, and maybe it was. So if we have a bunch that are happening right now before we sustain President Oaks as a church, as president of the church, then maybe it means something.
Did you hear about that meteor that they said it was I was reading about it, was a cannonball size that flew into the roof of a home in Texas?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I don't hear about that very often, but
No,
yeah,
it's crazy.
interesting things. So do you
All
want me
right.
to pull up my PowerPoint?
Yeah, go for
All
it.
right, here we go. We'll just dive right in. So, okay, can you see this?
Yep.
Is this visible? Okay. All right. So I just want to start by apologizing to people on my channel. I have been MIA for a while. Easter is a really busy time. And my husband was just recently called as bishop. So I feel like we're really extra busy. We have a lot of things going on. So I can just get on here and share on my channel when I can. But I did want to share, yesterday was Palm Sunday. And so I hope everybody had a really beautiful Palm Sunday. And in our ward, we actually, we were able to have a really cool Easter activity where we celebrated Holy Week and talked about it, and we traveled to different rooms for each day of Holy Week. And we have some amazingly talented people in our ward. And so we had this fantastic just display. So talking about the Last Supper, talking about the resurrection, and anyways, and that's my husband kind of giving the final closing thing. So that was just a little bit of inspiration if you guys are thinking, what can we do to celebrate Easter more? I know that the church, I've talked about this quite a bit, and Jared, I know you have too, how the church is trying to push this focus on Easter. And so for our special Palm Sunday, we actually had a huge increase in attendance. So I don't know if you guys, if your ward noticed that, but we had probably around 50 more people than we normally would, which is pretty
Oh,
good.
wow. I didn't make it to church because my family is feeling sick. We were
Oh,
planning on
bummer.
going. We even invited our realtor that helped us buy this house, but she wasn't able to go. But yeah, I don't know. But
Yeah.
all this
And
right here that you're showing on the screen, that looks really good. There was, I don't know if your ward did this, but before moving here, I think it was like a year before I moved to Independence, I
Mhm.
was able to go visit the Kansas City Steak Center, and they had
Yeah.
like a Holy Week um, activity night where it was like a thing where you went from room to room, and each room had
Hmm.
a different theme from Holy
Yeah.
Week.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
thought that was really neat.
Yeah.
I may have missed it. Is that what you guys did
That's what
here?
we did. Yeah, you went room to room, and then each room had a special message and a display. And like for instance, in the Palm Sunday room, they would kind of act out, wave the palm fronds, and then you would talk about what each day of Holy Week was. And then we really promoted the Easter Church of Jesus Christ website that gives you those days. So this week, people can so easily click on that now and see what each holy day means, what happened in the scriptures, and how you can reenact and make that like a live part of your week. Um, and then we did the whole like Easter egg hunt thing and everything. So we kind of did a kid aspect, we did an adult aspect, and then of course on the Sunday it was the big musical program. So a lot of solos and music, and it was really nice. It was a really great kickoff to Easter, and I love how Easter and General Conference line up. And this is kind of what we talked about when I first shared on your channel, we talked about two things, women and the second coming and holy day stacking, right?
Hmm.
And holy day stacking was just my term for what eventually, I'll skip forward to this, Elder Gong mentions in in an April General Conference where he calls it sacred and symbolic convergence. And then he lists, these different times, these different dates when Palm Sunday, General Conference, Passover, Easter kind of line up. And we will dive into that in a minute. But I also really love the reason I think is important scripturally is in Exodus 12:14, it says, "This day shall be unto you for a memorial, and ye shall keep it by an ordinance forever." And so in the scriptures, the word memorial, the Hebrew word is zikaron, and this ordinance-linked word is often used for holy days, and it also kind of connects to temple ordinances and this kind of memorial remembering. If you think about it in a temple sense, it enables us as individuals to feel as though we are a participant, right? So this is why we remember. The Book of Mormon says, remember, remember, remember. And these holy days are ways to remember God and what he has done for his people and what he continues to do, right? So making those events in history more authentic for our present day. So kind of just like the sacrament. And when we go to the temple, we place ourselves in the position of an active participant. So kind of just a throwback. This is my old slide that I shared in one of our very first videos, just remarking how I thought it was really awesome that the day the Kirtland Temple was dedicated, this is a huge day in the restoration of the church, but how it kind of had a throwback to those big events back in the days of Moses, just that you had a convergence of General Conference, or sorry, not General Conference, that's coming up, but we had this convergence of Passover and Shabbat Haggadah, the 10th of Nisan and Palm Sunday. This was the original holy day stacking of the Kirtland Temple. And it was, the records and what Joseph Smith said, they referred to this day as a Pentecostal outpouring and blessings being poured out. And so in Doctrine and Covenants 110, it says, "Yea, the hearts of thousands and tens of thousands shall greatly rejoice," right? There were not that many church members at that time. So this is a continued blessing. "Rejoice in consequences of the blessings which shall be poured out and the endowment with which my servants have been endowed in this house. This is the beginning of the blessing which shall be poured out upon the heads of my people. Even so, amen. To turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the children to the fathers, lest the whole earth be smitten with a curse." And there you go. You have that curse. You have that kind of Passover reference there, right? And this event that's happening on this Passover. So you have these connections between God's promises, the temple, and the events in history. Um, and so we kind of talked about, I showed this and we talked about how in 2020 and 2023, there were like these little bookends. So I think this is kind of when we started talking about bookends. And this was Palm Sunday, Nisan 10, Shabbat Haggadah, and General Conference lined up. So again, that's the Kirtland Temple, this idea of blessings being poured out. and also the Passover theme, right? So also at the same time, you have these kind of trials and tribulations. And in 2020, we definitely saw we saw that, right? We saw these hard times in 2020. And at the same time, it was referred to as a hinge point. And um, I talked about how, at one point we had a general authority that told the story about President Eyring, how he relayed that President Eyring stood up and said, I wish to prophesy that essentially in 2020, this was three general conferences. So he specifically said in three general conferences, the blessings of heaven will be poured out upon families in the church. And it was at this time that we instituted the Come Follow Me program, right? And so that really was a fulfillment of that, the Come Follow Me program that then prepared us for what was happening in the world with COVID and being able to continue to teach. And so just this morning, it occurred to me that I thought, you know what, I want to kind of layer what we were looking at with that pattern with Palm Sunday and General Conference. And just to remark again on Bat Haggadol, if you're wondering what that is, it does not always line up with Nisan 10, but it is this particular like stacking of days is the same lineup as the Kirtland Temple dedication. And the meaning of Shabbat Haggadol is the day that they take the lamb. So it's like the real beginning to the Passover holiday. So they take the lamb into the home. And so if you think of this yellow highlighted area as like the beginning of this kind of Passover theme. And so if we look at what Elder Gong says, he specifically highlights. So if we look here at his footnotes, when he talks about sacred and symbolic convergence, these are the examples he gives. So he says, Easter and General Conference occur on the same Sunday in 2026 and 2029. And then he remarks down at the bottom, Passover also occurs 2026 and 2029. So if we look at here, I highlighted in purple when General Conference lines up with Easter and Passover. So you can see the little key on the left. So here in the center, notice how like each of these dates are 3 years apart. So this is the convergence that I first noted. And then later, he actually talks about this as being a thing, the convergence. And then he highlights after that, he talks about 2031 and 2034 being Palm Sunday and General Conference. So 2031, 2034, those are our Palm Sunday General Conferences. So notice here we have these Palm Sunday General Conferences. The 2021 was obviously a huge deal, right? We have the prophet calling it a hinge point. We had the Hosanna shout. It was the bicentennial and the what was it? The memorial that was given, the big statement to the church at that time.
The
Anyways,
proclamation.
the big proclamation to the church, yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
not the proclamation to the family, but kind of just stating, our
The
views.
sixth proclamation, the proclamation on the restoration of the, I can't remember. Dang it, I can't remember what it's called, but
Yes, thank you. About Joseph Smith and the restoration of the
yeah.
gospel. And
Mhm.
yes, yeah. And so it's kind of interesting just to kind of look at how this plays out because we have Palm Sunday at General Conference 3 years later, Palm Sunday right in the center, Easter and Passover, and then again 3 years apart. If we go back to 2034, this 3 year spacing of Palm Sunday General Conferences once again. But it's also interesting because if we look at it from 2020 to 2034, when we get to 2024, we have Elder Stevenson who highlights this momentous decade, right? And he
Mhm.
talks about how, um, like, essentially, this is the never to be forgotten decade. And he compares it essentially. So, again, kind of pointing to this 2034 as being kind of this like peak time. And he talks about the Salt Lake Temple open
Really quick,
house.
can you go back to that slide really quick?
Yeah.
So that's interesting as we think about this upcoming general conference. That the first purple one there, the where there's the convergence, the holy stacking of Easter and general conference, that's going to be like out of this set of you have like these six general conferences, that's going to be the first Easter one, the first purple one on this graph. And it's just it's interesting how that plays out. because it just happens to be the one where this can be President Oak's first general conference as president of the church. It works out very nicely. Um, it's also interesting. Do you mind if I share my screen just really quick before we continue?
Sure, yeah.
Well, I have something I want to share really quick. So you have this. So keep this in mind, what you're seeing here on Jen's slide. And then did you click on discontinue to share?
Oh, no, let me see. I think, oh, sorry. Almost got it. There
Okay.
we go.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna go to my spreadsheets really quick. Um, I know I've brought this up a lot lately, but let's go to my timeline, Jubilees spreadsheet. And it's interesting because another thing that highlights this general conference is the whole Joseph Smith Jubilee thing. Again, if you're
Absolutely.
new to this concept,
Absolutely.
Joseph Smith declared 1836 as a Jubilee year, starting on April 6th. It was the seventh year of the church because the first year was 1830, second year was 1831, and so 1836 was the seventh. And then 7 years later, in 1843, the next, what he was calling a Jubilee year, started. And again, it was on April 6th. And so if we go to, here, let me zoom in. So if we go to this year, 2026, as of right now, we are still in one of these Jubilee years. Now, I can't say that the church has continued to observe this in any way, but if it had continued, this would be the 28th Joseph Smith Jubilee, which
Hmm.
ends on April 6th. So, what that means is that the last 2 days of this 28th Jubilee are General Conference, the 2 days of General Conference, and then the day after is April 6th, and that would end this Jubilee. And it was during this Joseph Smith Jubilee that President Oaks became president of the church. The year before that, in 2024, that's when we had the 2024 eclipse. With President Nelson, he did not become president of the church during the Jubilee period because it was January 14th, but it started a few months later. But the year before he became president of the church in 2017, that's when we had the 2017 eclipse. And along with this idea of stacking, not that, so we have Elder Stevenson, who in General Conference, the October 2017 General Conference, pointed out that that eclipse took place during President Monson's 90th birthday. So he was pointing to the convergence of those two events. So Jen just talked about Elder Gong and how he pointed to convergence. We have Elder Stevenson pointing to the convergence of the eclipse and President Monson's 90th birthday. So it really does seem to be a thing. And when you look at Jen's chart with the different holy day stackings with General Conference and the pattern, and you look at the Joseph Smith Jubilee, if this is still some kind of a thing, it's very unlikely. It's very unlikely.
It's, yeah, and it's also unlikely that there are so many angles you can look at this Jubilee this year, because if you look at it from the angle of America's 250th, Jubilees are cycles of 50. So the covenant land of America is hitting this big, like, and the church is recognizing that. We are a part of that, and the church is celebrating that. We even the church is, having us to, observe the fifth Sunday, America 250. And even looking at it from, I've examined on my channel how from multiple angles, looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Melchizedek scroll points out this special Jubilee. And a lot of people, not of our church, look at it as being this year of 2026 right now. And so there's a lot of different angles you can come at that point to this year as being a Jubilee. And I like how in the Melchizedek scroll, it calls it a day of judgment and favor. This is also the time when President Oaks, the judge, became our prophet. And specifically, like the angle that I was looking at and the calendar that I was looking at, I won't go into the details, but on the very day, day one, that was the day that President Nelson passed away, and the judge became um, the prophet on that day. So there's a lot of different ways, right? So if you discount one, you can look at another, but all of these kind of coming together
There's
makes for
also
an interesting year.
you could call it the BYU Jubilee because they
Yes,
had the
BYU.
150th anniversary last year. But when they opened that 50-year time capsule, when they first sealed it, President Oaks was president of BYU. And then 50 years later, 2 days after he was ordained president of the church, is when they opened that time capsule. That was a 50-year period. Has to do with BYU. I never went to BYU, but I still find it significant. I've expressed before on the
Right,
channel, at the
right.
very least, if I was president of Oaks, I would probably be like, whoa, when we
Well,
sealed
yeah,
this, I was the
really.
president of BYU. Now I'm president of the
Yeah.
church. It must be some kind of confirmation to him.
Yes.
Not
Yes.
that he
Yeah.
probably needs it, but that the Lord really is there. He really was meant to be president of the church at
Right.
this time.
Right.
So yeah,
Right. Yeah. A lot of big events coming up. So I love how, Elder Stevenson highlighted that. I also find it interesting that if we start with 2020 as a hinge point and we see this pattern of the general conferences ending with kind of, Elder Stevenson kind of talked about that ending in 2034, right at the dead center. So if you think of 2020 to 2034, that's two sets of seven, 14 years, and right at the dead center of that is the Salt Lake Temple open house and dedication. So 2027,
that's a really good observation. Yeah,
right there at the center. And I think that is not by coincidence. I'm just saying, I don't think that's a coincidence. We have our hinge point, right? We know that these convergences and holy days, it has to do with God's covenants and how God moves, right, with his covenant people. And we kind of talked about this, the comet and the fireball. So I'll skip past that. But Jared, I don't know if I have shared this with you, but or if you have seen this, but I wanted to just I thought you might find this is kind of cool. Is that there's kind of this interesting 47 years ago was when the Iranian Islamic the Republic with Haman versus Asa, Persia versus Jew spirit. Basically, like Iran as we know it now began 47 years ago. And it was actually 47 years ago that President Kimball gave that prophecy about women rising up to speak, like women speaking
well,
in the latter days. And we also have a
really quick, in
president
case you
who,
guys don't know, that's why Jen started her channel because um, at the time that I interviewed her, it was because President Nelson kept reiterating this
yeah,
prophecy of President Spencer W. Kimball. If it would have been me, like if I would have been alive when President Kimball said that, I probably would not have taken it as like a prophecy per se, or like I would have thought like, oh yeah, it's like, right now, the women right now but no, President Nelson said it was a prophecy in that the women of now, President Nelson's time and after, would be the women that he was talking about that would bring in unprecedented numbers of people into the church. And so because he was referencing this prophecy so many times, I decided to do interviews to promote, uh, members of my audience who felt like doing YouTube channels to do it. And Jen was in that first group, and her channel has gone really far. Initially, she was just going to do a blog, but she has so much knowledge and so many insights. We talked about it. I was like, you should do a channel, like just do a
oh,
channel.
thanks, Jared.
And
I
so
would not
thankfully
have
she
done it
did.
without your encouragement. I'm still really shy about it. I'm always scared to come on the
You
camera.
shouldn't be. Now it's been so
I'm always
long.
trying to not do it. But I'm so excited about this stuff. It's hard to not share because it's just kind of fun. I really love it. I
How
just
many
love the
years has it
gospel,
been
and I
for you now?
love
Now it's like been 3 years for your channel, right? Like three
it's been
years,
three
maybe?
years. Yeah, it's just I just hit my 3 year mark not that long ago. And I know some people like this is not up their avenue, numbers and patterns and things like that. But for me, like it motivates me, right? So if you find something that gets you excited about the gospel and you find yourself working more, doing more, feeling good, feeling the spirit, like it's a good thing. And maybe, you know what I mean? It's been fun. And I feel like it has helped me in a lot of ways in my life to just propel me and stay excited rather than getting in a slump where you're like, oh, I have to do this. Sometimes with the gospel, you're like, I have to do this. You don't want to get in that like box checking, slog. So hopefully this helps. you guys. Like I said, even if some of this you might think, oh, that's just whatever. I don't think that really means anything. Like, that's okay. This is not on the level of like doctrine, right? So just interesting things to observe. But um, so with this number of 47, so 3 days before the last, we had three blood moons that occurred on the Esther Purim holiday. So that's again this woman theme, right? Esther is about a woman speaking up. And it's interesting because on each of those blood moons, there was something that happened with women and our church. So I don't know if you're aware of that, Jared, but I'll show you here.
Probably not.
But first, just looking quickly at the number 47 in Hebrew, the numbers 40 and 7 are probably two of the most symbolic numbers as far as just biblically, right? So 40 is generally a time of testing and trial, and 7 is kind of like perfection, completion. So you put this together, you have kind of completion of testing leading into judgment, right? So testing and judgment theme. And so that was, again, 47 years ago. And this quote right here, when President Nelson highlighted it, he specifically highlighted that that was in 1979 that President Kimball said that the major growth that is coming to the church in the last days will come because of the good women of the world. And talking about, women of the church reflecting articulateness in their lives. And he said that that time he saw is today. And so, anyways, we talked about that. And that is, again, just very motivating. And I want to just motivate other women to speak up. And there are a lot of ways that you can do that in your ward. And especially with women having just been called into the Sunday school, which we'll talk about that. I have a slide for that. But kind of leading up to these signs having to do with women. And I talked about this on our very first channel that September 23rd, 2017, I found the most significance in this sign, this Revelation 12 sign that, all of the Christian world was basically saying, this is the day where what it describes in Revelation 12, where this says a great sign in heaven in the likeness of things on the earth, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And the woman being with child cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. And so, the Christian world thought, oh, it's going to be a rapture. But basically, what was happening in astronomy in the sky, you might say, if you were to look at, what happens, this would be the day that is the day that is described in Revelation 12. And on that day, we had women's conference, so the General Women's Conference. And then moving forward from that, we have 3 years in a row a blood moon on this Purim, which celebrates the story of Esther. And so on March 25th, 2024, this was when the Kirtland Temple opened and also the birthplace of the Relief Society. So the Red Brick Store opens. And then the following year, we have the blood moon on Triple Purim, ending with the Women's Relief Society broadcast on the 16th. So this was a super rare triple Purim, it's called, and it was right in the center of the three. So again, another three. And on that very final day, we have the women's broadcast, and it's being broadcast from the Red Brick Store. And then we look at the blood moon this year on March 3/3. So again, this number 3. And on that day, the church publishes this multi-year project. They make a really, really big deal about this. And it's this project called Rise Up and Speak. And it's Eliza R. Snow's Elect Ladies 52 Discourses. And that eventually will be in the LDS library. So this is kind of just showing you can visually see what happened on each of these blood moons that coincided with this Esther holiday. And it's kind of interesting because just a few days after that, we had the message from Camille Johnson and from the Relief Society. And this was the General Women's Conference message. And it was all about hard times. So kind of the talking point, the highlight, I just pulled this off of the church news, and it says that I know that life is hard. You can do hard with Jesus or you can do hard alone. That is your choice. But when you do hard with Jesus Christ, the hard becomes holy. You become holy women. So this idea of doing hard things, like life is hard, and we can be helped as, we bring Jesus Christ into our lives. And so my last video that I made, one of the things that I ended on was I came out with it before March 18th. And I just made a note of like kind of watching the March 18th timeframe because of these things. Because we had after, all of that the blood moons, this was the final blood moon on the Esther holy day. But right after that, we had a new moon. And if you look in history, what has happened on those days with that was Nisan 1. So Nisan 1 biblically was the day the tabernacle was set up and the glory of the Lord appeared to Israel. It was the day that Ezekiel's temple vision began. It's also stated in Genesis the day that the ark rested, and it's also the anniversary of 2020 when the trumpet dropped, right, from the Salt Lake Temple. And so I kind of thought that was like a little mini
That
convergence,
was on
not
Nissan
anything
one.
huge, but just like a
Yeah.
little mini convergence on that day. And so I wanted people to just be aware of that as we reach March 18th. And then sure enough, March 18th was the day that, again, this woman theme that the church released this thought saying that women can now serve as Sunday school presidents. So I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah. Really
Kind
cool.
of like a little trail of signs about women and then seeing the church move, right? As the church moves and progresses and is getting ready for the second coming. I just like to take note of this theme of women that kind of pops up. So kind of a cool deal.
Hmm.
And
Let me also just point out really quick because I just had this thought. So earlier I was talking about how Elder Stevenson pointed out the convergence of the eclipse and President Monson's 90th birthday, and then we have Elder Gong with uh, these upcoming general conferences and Easter and Palm Sunday, but also during the 2024 eclipse, Sister Freeman and I can't remember his name, but the young women's and young men's general presidents they went to Palmyra uh, to like film a devotional during the eclipse. And
yeah,
even though they didn't explicitly say it, it felt like they were highlighting, hey,
highlighting that.
everybody,
Yeah,
look,
yeah,
we're able to see the path, or we're in the path of totality
yeah,
here at the Sacred Grove. So that's like three different
right.
times.
Right, right. I mean, they really highlighted, they hosted that whole broadcast from the eclipse. They traveled there. That was a huge deal. And I know some people are probably thinking, wait, the eclipse is over and nothing big happened. I know some people kind of have that perspective, but the eclipse actually that was a 7 year like bookend with the two eclipses. There's actually another one that's over the area of the Red Sea that
yeah.
anyways, that's a whole other thing, but
But it's interesting with the 2024 one. Not only is it interesting that it went over the Kirtland Temple the month after we purchased it, and not only did
yeah.
it do that and also go over the Sacred Grove, but it was the day after conference. It was the day after conference. So it's like it kind of goes along with Elder Gong's thing about convergence. He said sometimes things don't exactly coincide, but just the proximity itself
Right.
is worth noting, essentially.
Right. And I think that sometimes people think like signs mean something like huge is going to happen on that day, but I think a lot of times it's symbolism and you think about what happened with the restoration of the church that the biggest things to happen in all the world are actually some of the smallest things, right? Like even just the church itself might be kind of cast aside as like, oh, that's not exciting or general conference, that's not exciting. But in reality, like it actually is. So even though like we kind of talk about these fantastical things that might sound fantastical in the sense like oh signs in the heaven and convergences and all of that it really what those things do are reflect back the simple truths of the gospel and that's how I view it. That's how I view it is that it brings us back to it's highlighting the truth of the restoration of the gospel today and I think the prophet and apostles are spot on how they stick to the basics and the doctrine. And I think these other things, as members, we can see it, but it should point us back to those simple doctrines that are, our spiritual necessities.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to throw this out there that if you guys want to watch this date with me, April 2nd, 2026, that is the first full day of Passover. So I kind of see this as the beginning of this convergence. And if you remember from my little chart before, you have the two general conferences. This is like the beginning of the Passover to Easter middle bookend general conference. So April 2nd, we'll see. And again, going back to looking at the bigger picture, right? Just kind
Actually,
of
wait,
like,
wait. Sorry, just really quick. I should bring this up. It may not be related, but you know my friend Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz.
yes, yeah.
So he just did a video in which he was talking to one of his friends, um, another Jew in Israel, and they were having like a very serious conversation about doing a sacrifice on the Temple Mount. There have been
Oh,
previous attempts where like activist groups and individuals like they try and do it, and usually they end up getting arrested. But
right.
they were talking about the fact that this year is unlike other years because the Israeli police, they've kept the Temple Mount pretty much closed because the war with all the ballistic
Hmm.
missiles. And my understanding is it has to do with if you have a lot of people going up there for Ramadan, for example, uh, the shelters around that area don't have enough capacity in case like everybody needs to go for shelter, and so they're
Yeah.
just like keeping it closed or limited. Um, but basically, for the most part, since the war started, it's basically been closed. And
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly their rationale. I'd have to watch the video again. Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz has his own channel of the same name, but they were talking about like in a very realistic way that they may do that this
Wow.
year. And if that's the case,
Wow.
that's just like in a few days.
Wow.
Um, because I think
That would be huge. That would be a huge deal. That would
I think
be
it's supposed to be done on the eve of Pesach 1.
right. Well, even just thinking about this Passover that's coming up. So it technically starts the evening of the evening before. So the evening of April 1st is the beginning, and
Yeah.
then April 2nd is the first full day. But to think that this Passover, I mean, the reality of what is happening in Israel right now, how they're having to, be close to their bomb shelters and they're in the middle of this war. And I cut out I didn't want to go into all of this. I did on a previous video on my channel, but I see also a connection with the blood moons to the Iran war, kind of this warning signal. And I talked about it like last year with the blood moons. I've talked about it multiple times when I talk about these blood moons. So not even just this year. Obviously, this year it was really obvious. It was 3 days before that final blood moon, but years before, I was talking about how it had all these themes having to do with Israel and Iran. And so it was not surprising to me the timing of the war. And I think it just highlights the importance of this war, the biblical importance of this war. And I think the connection between, so this sign having to do with women and the war and the prophecy of President Kimball about women, if you think about if this war continues and we are, let's say, just theoretically, we have to do a draft, right? If we end up putting boots on the ground, if this gets to be an extended thing, if this has all kinds of repercussions around the world, eventually, and we have to live through this bigger war type scenario, um, it will, I mean, it will be women. So it's kind of an interesting light to look at how now women can be Sunday school presidents or maybe opening up positions for women. Because if you have men going off to war, then the women have this real community gathering, spreading the gospel, helping, serving during difficult times.
Yeah. Can I share my screen just really quick? Just because I want to put up the calendar and then get back to your your slideshow. But the reason why I bring it up because you were just talking about um, you know April because let me see the last slide really quick that you just had up before this one. What day are we
That's fine.
watching next? April 2nd, 2026. This is the first full day of Passover and the beginning of the convergence Passover. Okay. All right. Yeah, let me share my screen really quick. And I'll show you, I mean, I'll explain why I'm bringing up this thing about the potential sacrifice attempt.
But yeah, that's really interesting to hear the Israel side of that. And
I'm
And what's
actually probably going to make a video about it, about Adam's video on my other channel called Jewish Scroll, um, because you just have to watch their interview. But
yeah.
yeah,
And it is really interesting to watch, what's happening here. I just always think of things in the light of the covenant land of America and then the covenant land of Israel, right?
yeah,
The Gentiles and the Jews, and eventually we're going to be on the same page. And I see a lot of like synchronicities between the restoration and, I mean, the Jews essentially because, right, that's the Bible truth. They follow the Old
yeah.
Testament.
So do you mind stop sharing your screen for just a second, and
Oh,
then
sure.
I'm
Yeah.
going to show mine.
Okay.
Okay. So, all right. So here we are. Um, so like Jen was saying, April 1st at sundown, that's when Pesach begins, the Passover week. The entire thing is sometimes referred to as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And usually, when we're talking about the Passover um, feast, we're talking about the Passover Seder. And I think that's eaten that first evening, um, not during the first full day on Pesach 1, but I think right here. And I think that's the day that they would normally uh, sacrifice the lamb so that they could have it, like have the like leftovers or whatever for the Passover Seder. So I'm bringing that up because if they actually do it, it, because like one thing that they were talking about was how serious this guy was. They seem to be
Oh,
suggesting that there's a chance that the authorities would actually allow them to do it. I don't know
really?
why they were so confident that he didn't really elaborate, but
Huh.
he was talking about how to have it be kosher, you have to have all the proper things, which a lot of other people have not had. Like you have to have a Cohen, which is a Jewish priest, one who's allowed to do it. You have to have the right kind of knife, and then you also have to have an altar. And other people that have tried to do these things in the past, again, they usually get arrested and they don't have those things. But this guy said he's like all ready to go. He has like
Wow.
everything
Wow.
lined up.
Wow.
And
And
so,
it does kind of feel like this period of time with the war and all the chaos. It's just, I mean, war is a time where a lot of crazy things can happen and almost, I mean, everybody and anybody like that has something they want to do kind of unusually, an agenda or whatever, there are a lot of ways to, make things happen. And I think that's true for Satan, and that's true for God, that you have evil trying to use a time of chaos to make evil things happen and to create, death and destruction. But then you also have God who is above that, and he is also orchestrating, other unique events that will
yeah.
be in the end for the good. It'll come back around and be for the good.
Well, already since October 7th, from then all the way until now, there have been less and less and less restrictions of what Jews can do on the Temple Mount to the point where they are openly praying. They're openly doing like the full prostration type prayers where like you
Hmm.
lie down face first on the
Really,
ground.
really well.
Very, very visible. They lit a menorah up there.
Oh,
They put
wow.
on tefillin, which is like the black straps that they put around their arms, and then like the box on their forehead. Um, so since the start of that war, I don't know. The Israeli police are not cracking down. They're allowing more and more stuff to happen, and so now not only have we had the Hamas war, but there's been the 12-day war with Iran. And
Hmm.
now we have
Yeah,
this like second war with Iran, which is much more intense, and
yeah,
it's resulted in like the shutdown of the Temple Mount. And
right.
so maybe that's why they think it's a possibility. But if they do it and they're successful, that's going to
That's
be a
huge.
turning point. That's
That's
going to
huge. Oh
be
yeah. Yeah, that would be huge. That would
because
be huge. So
one of the reasons that
keep your ear to
Hamas,
the ground. Keep talking to Adam. Get us the scoop on that because
I
that
will.
would be something. That would be a huge milestone.
Because
And
one of the reasons
again,
that Hezbollah, or sorry, one of the reasons that Hamas said that it started the war and launched the attack was because of the red heifers. Because the
mhm,
year before, In
Right. I
2022,
remember
they
that.
imported 5 red heifers, and that rubbed them the wrong way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
can you imagine what would happen if they do a sacrifice on the Temple Mount?
Oh
So
man.
I'm just putting that out there. You guys might want to watch that video. I'm gonna do my own video about it on Jewish Scroll. But anyway, I just wanted to
That would
point
be
that out.
huge.
Sorry.
That would be huge. That'd be huge. So yeah, keep us updated on that front. I feel like you are so on top of that and you have those great connections there in Israel to kind of keep us up to date on what's happening there.
Absolutely.
Let me okay. So yeah, Passover this year should be interesting. And then again, just kind of like going back to what we were talking about in Deuteronomy 11, as far as outpourings in that beginning in 2020, it says, I will give you the rain of your land in his due season, the first rain and the latter rain. And therefore you shall lay up these my words in your heart and in your soul, and bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be as frontlets between your eyes. And thou shalt write them upon the doorposts, again, the Passover imagery, the doorposts of thine house and upon thy gates. You can see the scriptures weave this imagery, and you have to understand the biblical Hebrew, traditions and events to comprehend the prophecies of the future and how they intertwine, and why God would want us to see that, the Alpha and Omega, the God in the beginning, the God at the end. And
And
so
by the
again,
way,
kind of
that
interesting.
scripture, the one that you just had up, I think
Yeah,
that's the one where they get the idea of putting the black box on their head between their eyes. Like it's
there you
based off.
go. There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, he's working with us and here in America. He's working with the Jews in Israel. It's happening co-currently, and we're each understanding it through our lens. But God works with each of us. And, eventually we'll all see eye to eye when Christ stands on
Yeah.
the earth.
It was
Um,
interesting that that scripture was there after having just talked about it.
yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. I did not make that connection. So it's really cool that you were talking about that. Then boom, the next slide.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So, yeah, on Moses' day, you had Shabbat Haggadol open the door to Passover events. So, the very, very beginning of these spiritual manifestations leading up to their deliverance. And then in Jesus' day, you had Palm Sunday open the door to spiritual manifestations of Holy Week, right? The entrance of Christ as the King. And then in Joseph Smith's day, the dedication of the Kirtland Temple opened the door to this Pentecostal spiritual manifestations leading to the restoration of the Church of Jesus Christ, temple ordinances, and then 7 days later, his appearance in the temple on Easter Day. And then in our day in 2020, we have this hinge point reference opening the door to, is that possibly referencing to this opening of the door to these spiritual manifestations and events leading us up to the second coming? And we do not know when that is, but we can watch the signs and ponder on it. And so this Shabbat Haggadol, this would be the Sabbath before the Passover. And then you bring the lamb through the door of the home. Passover is you put the blood over the door to escape the plagues. Palm Sunday, you have this golden gate where Christ is supposed to be entered, and that's where he entered and was received as a king. Resurrection, the opening of the door of the empty tomb. In the days of the restoration, Joseph Smith opened the door to the temple ordinances. And then the hinge point in history, are we now again a hinge point opening a door to the events that will eventually lead us to the second coming? And there certainly has been a lot of highlights. I mean, that whole bookend thing with President Nelson talking about, personal revelation, and he really highlighted that, and that it won't be possible to survive without the Spirit. Um, I butchered that quote, but
Yeah, the one that Elder Anderson recently talked about in the BYU
yes,
Idaho devotional, where he's like, look, President Nelson during his first general conference, he said, "You'll not survive spiritually without the constant companionship of the Holy Ghost." And then President Oaks repeated that in his first public address as president of the church at the BYU devotional. That one,
right,
right?
right, right.
Yeah,
And he said that was the bookend to that. And now what
yeah,
do we have? This convergence that begins with Passover and Easter and General Conference and the Women's Conference telling us to how to be prepared for hard times in our lives. And I also just wanted to note while we're on the Easter topic that the church has really highlighted also this idea that Easter is a season, and technically the season does not fully end until Pentecost. So you have this ties back into the Jubilee theme, the Jubilee cycle. And let me just kind of explain that in the sense that you have Easter. And I also want to note that if you go to the church website, they list the Monday after Sunday. So you have Holy Week, and then there's a Monday after Sunday. I just call that Book of Mormon Monday because it refers to the fact that Christ was resurrected and then he appeared in the Book of Mormon. And this idea that, right, even just every Sabbath day, we're remembering Christ and the resurrection and the events of Holy Week. So we continue, but then 50 days after Easter is Pentecost. And so that was the day that um, essentially like the disciples were given extra help. The Spirit came down, they were given the Holy Ghost, and they began their missions. And that 50 days is almost like a little micro of the Jubilee. So the Jubilee is a cycle of 50 years, and Pentecost is a cycle of 50 days after Easter, but that happens, every year after Easter. And and again, tying that back to the Kirtland Temple, right? It's the beginning, the Kirtland Temple, it's the pouring out of blessings. And when we go to the temple, we are able to receive those blessings that the day that that door was open to us as a part of the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so just a quick little history reminder, Pentecost and how things stack and how God repeats these patterns with the same timing. So first, in Moses's days, it was known as the Feast of Weeks. It was a harvest celebration, and Moses received the Ten Commandments. And at that time, 3,000 people were killed. So this idea that just the law alone kills. And then in Jesus's day, this is where the book of Acts begins, and they started doing the miracles, right? So they were blessed with an extra measure of the Holy Spirit, and you had 3,000 people that were baptized. And I also want to just throw this in as a little connection in my mind that I'm always really interested in this Pentecost idea because I do feel like these blessings, these Pentecostal type blessings that come from the temple will increase as the world gets darker. We will receive increased blessings in our lives. And so it's interesting how President Oaks compared himself to like from Elijah to Elisha. And it was Elisha who got the double, what is it, the double of the mantle. Sorry, I'm saying that in a weird way, but essentially like a double dose, like twice the mantle. And so it just kind of makes you wonder if, as we go into the last days, we'll see increased, extremes on both sides, increased blessings, increased trials and things. Certainly if we see the war continue and things like that. But anyways, so Joseph Smith's day, we have the Kirtland Temple that was dedicated. So this was the beginning of the Latter-day Pentecost with his promise that it would eventually pour out upon tens of thousands. So again, that ongoing promise. And yeah, and then in Joel. So again, tying it back to that theme of women in the latter days and the second coming and women just being a symbol of the church. We have that prophecy in Joel at the beginning where it talks about, the Spirit will be poured out upon everybody, essentially, men, women, children, and then I just wanted to share, we talk about things in generalities. We look at prophecy, we look at scripture, we look at what the church is doing. But I know kind of for each of us, we each have our own little things, like our own little lives and our own little miracles. And so I just wanted to share one example. I have so many examples. Like one of the reasons I'm so excited about just watching holy days and how things happen is because God knows that it motivates me. And it's kind of like, I think because of that, he speaks to me on certain days and things that happen in my life. And one of my favorite things is that 2 years ago on Pentecost, I talked about how, Pentecost has this theme of blessings being poured out upon, right? The old, the young, men, women. And I love, love, love cats. My family loves cats. And so we love them so much that my husband surprised us with kittens to just for the day. to play with. And my daughter, on this day on Pentecost, she said that she had a dream that an eagle grabbed a kitten. And I thought that's weird because she didn't know that we were getting kittens. So that's weird that she would have that dream. And then we look up and we see there's an eagle circling. I'm like, oh my gosh, like she had a dream to warn us because that would be terrible. It was my brother's kittens. That'd be terrible if that eagle grabbed those kittens when we were not aware. And so because she had that dream and she told us, we got the kittens to safety. We brought them inside, and I made this slide at the time, so 2 years ago for Pentecost, and I just talked about like how sometimes we pray and we don't get what we ask for, and other times we don't ask, and the Spirit answers the unspoken prayers of our heart. And I just talked about how, like, if our family had one like prayer or wish, it would be to get a cat, but I was extremely allergic, just not a possibility. And then on Pentecost last year, I was staying at a friend's house, and she had this cat that was a hypoallergenic cat, and it was like on that day that like I realized I like put the cat like in my face and petted it, and I had zero allergies. And so when I came home, we were able to like get this cat, and just it was just so funny how the timing of it was perfectly in sync with my thoughts from the previous year, kind of lamenting like, oh, like if it were to be like the second coming, what would you want? Like our family would be like, we want to have a cat. Or like, what blessing would you want? And so it's funny to kind of state that. And then the next year, that blessing was realized on that very day. And that's just kind of how I see like God working in the church and working in my life. And so part of my own personal joy that I like to share.
Exactly. That's why when it comes to signs, I feel like if you're already familiar with signs in your own life, then it's the same concept with signs for the church, signs for the world. Um, Sometimes it's very intimate and subtle. Sometimes it's big and obvious and cinematic. There's kind of like I think, a whole array of different types of signs, but um, there's a lot of things that like maybe only you would understand and everybody else thinks is ridiculous. And I think that we need to be mindful of that um, when it comes to signs for the church or signs for the Jews. I like to watch for what I think are signs for the Jews. Um, but it's like the Lord can work in lots of different ways, whether it's in patterns, holy day stacking, the convergence of different events, or it could even be just the timing of something. Because, like, a lot of times
Right.
people will be like, well, we know why that happened, or this happened because this person decided this. But it's like, it's not about being able to explain how it happened. It's the
Right. It's
fact that it
just
happened at a certain time or it brought a certain feeling to you. It
right. Or
communicated a
or
message.
or like going back to kind of that first slide, it brings to remembrance certain concepts and stories, and it builds your faith and it builds your resilience. And so whether it's something small like this with like a cat, or whether which is huge for me, but or if it's something big, like when I talk about the Revelation 12 sign in the heavens on the day of General Women's Conference, you just look at how the themes line up. Like on that day, the thing that really stuck out to me was not only were we having a women's conference, but it was, to me, I felt like it was very historical and on point with this sign of women in the sense that it was Sister Eubank who it was historical to have like a single woman that not only was she the head of the charity arm of the church, but she was also the General Relief Society president. So never before in history did you have a single woman who was the head of the charity arm and the Relief Society president, and she was speaking on this day of a sign in the heavens about women that's described in the book of Revelations. And that probably to most sounds fantastical, like that's not connected. But the way I see it is just it just reminds me that God is in the universe and he's in the details of our lives.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we should probably end here, but we'll talk again. Probably the next time that we'll talk is when we interview your sister-in-law, Lisa, about her book, and then we'll have other interviews as well in the future. Um, for all I know, maybe we'll be talking right after General Conference. I think there's a lot of potential with it being President Oak's first General Conference for big things to happen, just because that's
Yeah.
what happened with
Yeah.
President President Nelson's first General Conference. That's
Yeah.
when the High Priest Quorum and Elders Quorum was combined into one big Elders Quorum, and then that's also when. Oh my gosh, did I already forget? I think that's when. Wait, it was that, and it was also the retirement of home teaching and visiting teaching, and ministering was introduced. So ministering and then combining of those two quorums, that's what started off his presidency. And then it was just more and more and more stuff after that. There was a lot of stuff that happened between his first two general conferences. So, and already with President Oaks, there's already been a lot of stuff uh,
Yeah.
before his first general conference, including no
Yeah.
more Saturday sessions of general conference. So,
Yeah, and I think
anyway,
I think we'll see more. I think there's more coming.
I do
I
too.
do. Yeah.
Um, Simply because there's a trend line, and then also just the things that you pointed out and that I pointed out in this video that feels like things are pointing to this general conference.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
for sure.
all right. Well, thanks for joining me, Jen. It's always good talking to you.
Yeah, it's
Um,
always a
I didn't
treat.
I didn't have that realization about the different stackings of like those different general conferences. I might have to like make a spreadsheet to take note of
Right. And then
that.
to have the Salt Lake Temple dedication in the center. Because I will say,
Yeah.
out of all the things I talk about, sometimes it's hard for me to express like a scale from 1 to 10 on like how important or pertinent it is, right? Sometimes it's like a tiny convergence, maybe a tiny chance it means something. And other times it's like, no, this has huge meaning, huge symbolism. And I would say dead center, if you were to form a chiasmus, I would put the Salt Lake Temple open house and dedication right there in the center. I think that is huge. I
Yeah.
think that's huge.
It's it's going to be a big deal. I know it will be.
Yeah.
So, all right, everybody. Well, again, if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to Jen, Christian Fire Poppy. The link is in the description box below. Make sure to subscribe to me. And then if you're wanting to know more about Judaism, I have my new channel called Explore, or sorry, not, that's my other channel, Explore Church Sites. I have that too. I have my new channel called Jewish Scroll. The link is in the description box below for that as well. We'll talk to you guys later.